they won't tell your salespeople. We've got Michael Leinbach and Tom Roth here from Wilson Learning sponsoring this webinar today as well. Thanks, guys, for that. We'll get started with Michael and Tom in just a moment. First, there's my picture with my shiny bald head. Thanks for joining the community. If you have any needs today, you can just send me a private chat during the session. And we have some great upcoming webinars. Come back next week. We've got Paul Yoakum's going to be here on the 24th to tell you how to stop forcing employee motivation. Just find it. And then on the 26th, Cynthia Clay is back once again. You get me, leveraging communication styles in virtual training. And then on the 31st, Halloween, we've got Jeffrey Hazlett coming to teach you how to never waste a good crisis. Successful strategies to thrive in an economic downturn. You register for those the way you registered for today's session. You can click the link right there right now, or just come back to the SMM Connect webinar page. And of course, you can follow us. If you get tired of seeing all those emails, just go ahead and follow us to get up-to-date information. And don't forget to get your copy of Sales and Marketing Management Magazine. Just go to salesandmarketing.com and /subscribe. Free for you. And I really want to thank Wilson Learning for continuing to provide us with excellent content again and again. So that being said, Michael and Tom, welcome back to SMM Connect.
Well, great. Well, thank you, David. And thank you all for being here. Complex sales almost always require high-level support in the client, making an effective interaction with executives critical to your salespeople's success. Unfortunately, the research says that a majority of salespeople are not prepared to make positive impressions on executives. So, hello, I'm Michael Leinbach, and I'm here with Tom Roth, and we're here to give you some insights into how we see having an effective executive level sales call can be made. I want to thank SMM Connect for this great opportunity. Adobe for this wonderful platform. Of course, David, thank you for being our producer. Always excellent to have you involved. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tom to introduce our session.
Thanks, Michael. As already mentioned, I'm Tom Roth from Wilson Learning. And as already mentioned by Michael, and thanks back to David for the longstanding partnership with SMM. And it's really wonderful to work with pros, as David referenced, those of you joining the call. I'll be very brief as an introduction, but I think even with a short hour, getting organized a bit on why we're here and how we're going to proceed, and hopefully what's in it for you to be here. One of the things that we like to pride ourselves on at Wilson Learning is our thought leadership on different topics. And so we're here to share our perspective and approach on how to help salespeople call higher. And there's really a lot more to it than just higher. As we'll talk through this, part of your ability to call higher is dependent on your ability to call wider. So we'll actually cover both of those areas. The idea of using research that we've done, so rather than just sharing our opinions, we'll try to share research. Michael will get us going on that. We want to explore expectations of executives. It's one thing to know what you want to get out of a meeting with an executive, but it's more important you understand what they want to get out of it, and how do we make sure that we meet those expectations. We all strive, regardless of our product or service, to be seen as a strategic resource. And I'm a huge believer, as much as I'm used to winging it when I have to, that there's a one-to-one relationship between good prep and good meetings. And so we'll talk a little bit about how we prepare. And hopefully what we get out of this is salespeople being able to serve customer organizations by creating strategic level value. I get that's a lofty statement for 45, 50 minutes of content, but let's see if we can get a good start on that. One of the things we often do up front in a webinar like this is try to establish some commonality. And so this is just really simple, couple of questions that if you've ever heard this, or if you've heard this 1,000 times, go ahead and chat, type yes into chat. We want to call higher in the organization. We think it's a key to bigger business. In today's world, I don't know about you guys, but we're finding, if I could use a baseball analogy, since we're in the middle of the playoffs, we're getting a lot of singles and doubles, and getting home runs is harder. And so we believe the key to getting more home runs, if you will, is being able to call higher in the organization. How about our salespeople once they get there, there's still an element of confidence in how to talk to executives. Okay, great, we got an appointment. Now what? And I'm seeing all yeses, so I'll keep rolling quickly here. How about the fact that, yeah, we can get to executives, but we've got to be able to have a better high level business acumen discussion. This is not a product pitch that we're talking about. How about we're just not finding the right business issues to connect? The issue is we know we have good product, we have good services, but it's unclear the degree to which it's connecting with what their issues, problems, or things. My goodness, all yeses. So I'll pick up the pace here. This last one is interesting for me because a lot of us are very proud of our products, our services. One of my roles at Wilson Learning over the years has been to help create some of our product offering. And so we're so proud of our stuff. And yet more and more, it's becoming hard to differentiate in products and services from others. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So
lots of yeses.
Yeah. And by the way, in Gary's point, issues, pain, try to sell the goals. And the key there is, I'm assuming you mean, and I'll speak as if I'm correct here, their goals, not your goal. We know what our goals are, but it's really, what are your goals and how is it we can sell to that rather than I'm out here selling to meet our goals. So let's start with this whole issue of product. If you think about sales effectiveness over the years, and I see from the backgrounds of people here, I'm probably speaking to the converted and to the choir. So I want to anchor our time on the sales effectiveness side to a key point, but starting with, it all starts with having good products and good service. When we talk about our advantage in the marketplace at Wilson Learning, first thing out of our mouth is it starts with world-class content. But guess what? A lot of people have world-class content. One of the most embarrassing meetings I ever had with a customer was we went into their office and they had all the material like participant guides and leader guides spread out. And they said, this is you and your competitors. Please tell me the difference. I can't see the difference. It all looks the same to me. And as I said, having been the author of some of those, it kind of went a little pain in the heart, but I realized that in fact, as good as our stuff is, everybody has good product, and the length of time that our product serves as an advantage or a differentiator is shrunk tremendously in our global technology-oriented world. Okay, the next level of advantage is brand advantage, and I am a big believer that brand matters and consistency matters and all of that. Another one of the things that we talk about is the ability to you get a Wilson Learning experience regardless of wherever you are in the world, because all our different locations represent our brand. But more and more, I really have become a believer that what brand gets you today, and there's some brands that just carry huge amount of weight, but for most of us, what brand gets you is invited. It gets you involved. And the notion that you can create differentiation alone through product and brand is really difficult. And one of the customer examples that has always stood out for me is a customer of ours who had, if I told you who it was, you'd know their product, you'd know their brand, and you'd say, boy, I wish it was as easy for us to sell like it must be for them. They came to us to work on their sales effectiveness because they'd lost a deal they thought they should have won. And they thought they should have won it because they were working with an existing customer who knew their products, who knew their brand, and they lost the deal anyway. And when we asked them, why did you lose? They said, the worst words I could hear from a customer: we loved your product. We know you well. We loved your product. In fact, you had a better product than your competitor, but we didn't understand how your product was going to help us solve our problem. Back to Gary's point. We know our goals. You know your product. We liked your product, but your product was not clear to us how it was going to help us solve our goals. That wasn't a product problem. That wasn't a brand problem. That was a salesperson issue. And so in order to take that which we count on in our product and brand and turn it into a true advantage, we've got to make sure that we understand and appeal to the customer's needs, priorities, and interests better than whom? Better than our competition does, because it's harder to differentiate on the product and brand side. So the idea then becomes, what is it that we need to do? Back to my little quick chat thing. What do we do when we get there? Do we have the competence and confidence to help our customers at the higher level?
Great. So if you're in an environment where competitors can replicate your product, where they can match your brand and brand awareness, then you're really counting on your salespeople to win. And so I want to ask you a quick question before we go on. What do your salespeople currently do when they're interacting with an executive? What characterizes their primary focus in that interaction? Do your salespeople, A, communicate the features and benefits? Do they, B, listen for key phrases so they can get into their product pitch? Do they communicate how the product solves a business problem? C, or D, do they understand and talk about the challenges the client's organization faces? Or E, do they demonstrate a desire to partner with the client organization? So we'll do this very quickly. Share with us, where do your salespeople primary focus? Give you another 10 seconds here. A lot of movement back and forth. Okay, why don't we go ahead and close the poll and share the results with people? So a lot of your people are really focused on the business challenges their organizations face, and that's great. About half of you are there, but the other half are, talking about their solution, their product, their capabilities, and in some respects, your results match what other organizations provide. If we can close the poll. This is some research that we ran across fairly recently, where it talked about where is the primary focus from the standpoint of executives. When you ask executives, where do salespeople spend their time? 80% of the time, executives say the salespeople are focused on sales, their point of view, the selling point of view, and only about 20% is customer focused. In fact, they further break it down. Won't spend a lot of time talking about it, but when they talk about a sales focus, it means it's a product focus. It means it's focused on how their product solves the problem, that they're listening for a key pitch. Only about 20% of the time do they talk about partnerships or trying to understand the challenges the organization is facing. And so when a salesperson goes in with this sales focus in the organization primarily, then they're not meeting the needs and the expectations of the executive. So they're not serving as a source of advantage for your organization. And we found that there are 4 keys to making that happen. But in addition, when we talk about this perspective, 94% of sales of buying executives indicate that it is important for salespeople to engage in these executive buying positions. Yet only 19% indicate that salespeople do this effectively. So one, the salespeople tend to be focused on the wrong things. And 2, they're not very good at having these business-oriented discussions within the organization. And we have found that there's 4 key components to making sure this happens effectively. One is they need to focus on the executive's expectations. What does the executive expect from this meeting? 2, they need to leverage their connections within the client organization to position themselves correctly with the executive. They need to focus on the critical success factors that executive is facing in their business, and they need to wrap this all together in a strategic business call. And if they can do that effectively, if they can capture the executive's attention, they'll have a much better time of really connecting to that executive's need and having a more successful call with that executive.
It's interesting. I'm going to talk a little bit about executive expectations, but as I was listening to Michael share the one slide, and I don't have to go back to it, about the 94% of the executives expect that kind of business level discussion, but only 19% of the sales executives deliver on that. I believe that was research that Brandon Hall's group did. Even if that number 19% is off by double, let's say it's 38%. What's interesting about that is 38 or 40% squares pretty nicely with the quick poll you guys just filled out. About half said, yes, we're focused on the business issues, but the remainder were on other places. And so the idea then becomes, if in fact there's room for improvement here, where is it that we need to start focusing to make that improvement? And first of all, it starts with, we get so focused on, we're clear what we want to get out of the meeting. Let's be clear, we're understanding what the client, particularly the higher level executives' expectations are. When I look at this sentence, unknown expectations are often unmet expectations. I started laughing and thought, why did I bother using the word often? It's like, yeah, most of the time that's the case, often are unmet. And I started thinking even a blind squirrel gets an acorn once in a while, so it can't be all the time. And then I chuckled even further and thought, the last thing we need is our salespeople to operate like blind squirrels, because that's not going to help us improve the effectiveness of dealing with executive conversations. So let's start with understanding a little bit more about when are executives likely to meet with us. And Michael referenced research that we had done, and I want to start talking a little bit about some of the results of that research. When will executives meet? So there's a few situations that we think are rather obvious. One is, if you take the first two bullet points and really put them together, it's really moving into a relationship with a new supplier, and they're trying to assess and improve that. But it isn't just any supplier. It's with someone who's strategic, and you're looking for more of a long-term relationship. And the idea of what you commented on, the 50% that said focused on the business impact, is executives will meet when it's particularly big and has a tremendous impact on the organization's ability to meet its business goals. So the value of the deal against our own goals as the executive become critical. And certainly when it's time to look at any particular contract negotiations, if it's a high enough level and strategic enough level. Let me stop and pause and say, I've just given you a few starter thoughts. Any thoughts on other situations that you found in your experience when executives would be willing to meet with you? And if you put those in chat, I'll try to comment as those are coming up. If any come up, by the way. We got a couple typing. I'll wait a second here. Okay. Gary talks about at the end wanting to meet at the beginning also. The notion of before we get too far down the road, let's make sure this is right for both of us. They will meet when it's an introduction from a peer or a friend. Love that point, Joe. I'm going to show you a bar chart after this slide that'll make you look like you're a data genius on this. When a product issue problem arises, when in fact we bought into what you sold us to service the product, and there's issues, and I want to be part of the solution to that. So what you're talking about there is, it's a product issue, but it's also the relationship that we've established company to company is in jeopardy because of the fault or failure, if you will, of your product. Great. Let me share a couple of others. And if others come up, either Michael, you and I can jump in and add those. One of the things that we found also, it's kind of similar to Joe's point, but a little different, is calling executive. I used to travel pre-COVID a lot around the world, and when we would have local reps would talk about the fact that the COO of Wilson's coming into town, it would tend to get the attention of the executive to maybe get kind of peer-to-peer level connection, and they might be willing to meet under those conditions, which then allow us to talk more about the business issues that they're facing. Let me go to another one. Showing support for a management or team decision. One of the things that we found is definitely when we are engaged with a customer, there's only so much we can do in terms of how the product or service gets utilized once it's in-house. And so much more emphasis is being placed in organizations on executive sponsorship as part of the implementation. And so executives will meet when it's part of saying, look, I've said this is a priority. I'm funding this. I need to demonstrate my support for that. And Angel's reinforcing definitely the executive to executive level. And focus on the buying process, not the purchase itself. I'm going to go back to the issue of the product issue and say, it isn't just the purchase, it's the process. It's the buying process, it's the implementation process, it's the whole effectiveness of the usage of whatever we have acquired from you. And I mentioned the point that Joe made about reference from others. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but if you look at the green is always, purple is usually, red is occasionally, the burnt orange is never. Look at the two bar charts on the right. A cold call that I don't see a whole lot of always in there on either of those. This little sliver on a salesperson request. What's interesting, salesperson request and cold call are very similar in the sense of the external salesperson trying to contact the executive. Meeting contact might be we met at a meeting and we established a bit of a relationship, so I might take that call. Maybe an outside referral. But what's also really important is if you look at the far left bar, inside recommendation. Will always, usually, occasionally take that call because somebody that I know and trust in the organization has recommended it. I said at the beginning in the introductions, calling high has as much to do with our ability to call wide. What do they want to gain? I'll do this also very quickly. The research we did said of all the reasons that executives would meet with us, the number one reason is of what they want to get out of a meeting is they want to have learned something, gained some knowledge, gotten some insight, gotten something that stimulated their thinking, got a perspective that they don't get from their own internal folks, that I want to have learned something from this. And I go right back to how is it that you expect an executive to learn something if what you're going into is telling them how wonderful your product or your service is? They want to have a business dialogue. They want to know that they could have a company-to-company relationship, meaning it isn't just about the product. One of the things I've said around here for years is our clients are as interested in who they're going to work with as what they acquire from us. And so we've got to pay attention to that. They also clearly are looking for some authority and leverage in the provider's organization. Am I dealing with somebody who can get something done on the behalf of the provider and in the service of the customer? And they're looking for information about their business, their customer's business, the impact of the solution on their business. One of the phrases one of our colleagues uses is, executives don't care about training. They care about the impact of training. They care about the result of training. And one of the things about knowing information about the rest of the business is we get asked all the time, how do you know so much about our business? How do you know so much about it? Because we're talking to others. It's a great opportunity to share that with executives. And certainly they want to establish more of a collaborative point of view and information that they can use as competitive advantage in their own environment. The second area, yeah, Michael, on to you.
Okay, thanks, Tom. And I think it's important to keep in mind these expectations, these underlying expectations executives have, whether it's in being part of a critical part of the sales process, or whether it's learning new things, being stimulated by the interaction, gaining new insights into the business. And that's very important. But they also need to be clearly linked to their own organization's critical success factors to be able to move forward. But before we go on to there, I want to remind people that if you have questions or you want to make comments, happy to address these throughout. If you could put those into the chat, we can address them and address them occasionally. And if you have any right now, please do that, and we'll try to address those as we go along. But let's talk a little bit about critical success factors. And let's just do a very quick review of what a critical success factor is, because a lot of people have different perspectives on that. We define critical success factors as those few key areas of activity in which favorable results are an absolute necessity for that client organization. And it's we often talk about these as being means to a goal. They're not goals in themselves, but they're the factors that determine whether you can achieve goals. And a couple key points about them, because it's important when you try to link the expectations to their critical success factors, is one, there tend to be industry general critical success factors. So everybody in the airline industry, everybody in the software industry have certain critical success factors that they share. And as I'd mentioned, they're not goals, but they're means to a goal. They're things that get in the way of achieving the goals. They're factors critical to achieving the goal. But in addition to having general industry critical success factors, there are some that are unique to a customer, either in terms of priority or in terms of type. So that, for example, in the airline industry, safety is an important area, but safety might not be the most important thing to one carrier, but it might be the most important thing to another carrier. The other thing, and in fact, this issue often comes up when people ask about, well, does the title of the person, the executive we're talking to, make a difference? They do, in the sense that critical success factors will vary by level and function. We'll talk about this a little more in detail. But so it's about linking the person and their title and their focus to the critical success factor you're talking about. And the last thing is that critical success factors change over time. You either have a new strategic goal, or you've achieved a certain critical success factor and something else rises to critical importance, but they change over time. So if they have a critical success factor today, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the same critical success factor tomorrow. Now let's talk about the issue of the level and the type of person you're talking to, because the title of the person is important, because the kind of critical success factor they're dealing with will be different. So if we start at the executive level and we think about, or the operations level, sorry, if you're talking to an executive in the operational side of the organization, they're going to be focused on things like, their products, the pricing, and their differentiation from their customers, the features. And so your conversations with them need to narrow in on more of the technical issues, the operational issues that you have. Those are their critical success factors. Of course, operational executives' critical success factors are linked to the next level of critical success factor, mid-level management. They tend to be responsible for key business processes, and so therefore their critical success factors are tied to their processes, whereas the financial manager is tied to more of the finance side of the business, the margins, the revenue, et cetera. Whereas somebody else in another functional area, their critical success factors will be tied to that. And then when you get the executive level, it is more, their critical success factors are more around broad mission or strategic direction. It's about kind of creating core value. It's about how do we grow this organization, whether it's by diversity or by region, what is going to make our organization successful over time. So let's look at some examples of critical success factors. Kind of already mentioned a little bit about the airline industry. As I said, in the airline industry, building a reputation for safety is a critical success factor for every carrier. And also the idea that your offering needs to match the quality of your offering. But some like for example, some airlines are going to differentiate themselves on the luxury service they provide. And so a critical success factor is being seen as a luxury provider, providing services that other airlines don't offer is their differentiation in their marketplace. So making sure that their service and their advertising and their branding center around being a luxury service provider. And so this is an example of how you go from general to specific kinds of critical success factors within the organization. Well, let me get an idea of where are you in terms of thinking about critical success factors. What is one of your critical success factors as an organization? Type into chat um, some of the things about critical success factors you think are critical in your organization. Okay, so we've got revenue, clearly a critical success factor in almost every industry. Um, Returning to the top 10 customers inquiry on same day. So speed of response to customers' questions or concerns or queries is critical in some industries. Other industries not as critical. Um, 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 okay, I don't know if there's a critical success factor, but Angelo, thank you for being on the call. Um, so, again, critical success factors are going to differ along a number of levels, and they're going to differ from person to person. Why don't we keep moving and move to the next area, leveraging connections.
Thanks, Michael. Before I go to leveraging connections, I once I stopped talking, I had a chance to read John's comment when I was talking about what's important to executive when you are trying to meet with them. And I want to connect it to what Michael was just talking about with critical success factors. If you see John's point about in a publicly held company, read the proxy statement and understand how the executive are compensated. And so this is one of those, if you understand, if I, as an executive, am very clear on how I get paid, you want to take a wild guess at what the critical success factors at my level are going to be focused on. They're clearly going to be focused on that which impacts my compensation. And so for me as an executive, it may not be revenue. It may be more profit. It may be more market share. It may be, share price. There might be all sorts of things that my compensation is based on. And I guarantee you that I'm going to ensure that there are critical success factors around that. And so the idea being, if you understand that which is important to them from the perspective of what they're paid, it trickles into the critical success factors. And guess what? The middle level managers in my organization, when I start looking at their critical success factors, I'm going to begin to see things that reflect in making their attempt to have success with their critical success factors helps me achieve mine. That's why, to Michael's point, you got to look at throughout the whole organization. And if I want to be successful with an executive, I can't just focus on what is important to them. I also have a great opportunity to learn what's important from others because that feeds my ability to then share that with executives. So, for example, be seen as a resource by the customer by knowing more about the customer than they may know themselves. I guarantee you, I'm not going to learn more about their product and service as an outside salesperson. But if I've been having the right conversations with different people in the organization, I may, in fact, have a really good understanding of the critical success factors, the goals, the priorities, the initiatives that are getting funded to drive their business results. That's why calling wide is part of the solution to how I effectively engage with an executive when I'm with them. Go back to that bar chart. I referenced that one on the far left about I'm willing to take a call or a meeting if it's been recommended by somebody internally much more than I am other recommenders or other stimulus. So this is just a real simple point, but I want to make sure we do it graphically. You look at kind of a generic org chart here. Let's say I'm trying to deal with either division head or people up here. My ability to go right to these folks as much as I want to, as much as I try, I'm focused on them. They've got their own critical success factors, as do others at different levels in the organization. And part of what we're trying to say very quickly here is my ability to have a good conversation with someone at this level is partially reinforced by that which I'm learning at these levels. So when we start talking about how do I leverage my relationships to be sure that when I get access to an executive, I'm talking about things in the organizations that matter to them. By the way, what they don't care about, again, is my product and service. They care about what are the business challenges my organization facing that ultimately your product or service might be able to help us with. One of the things that I was thinking of an example of, I did some work with sales executives in a U.S. organization. So the people in the session I was running were from different regions within one organization. And they were having trouble generating new customers, new revenue, growing existing customers. And what we found out in our meetings with them was they, in fact, were competing more or less with each other, because the way that they'd set up the accounts was based on product line, so that I might be calling on a customer for my product line. A different rep might be calling on the same customer for their product line. And in fact, kind of unbeknownst to them or unintentionally, they were actually like competitors. And so once we understood that their critical success factors were very similar, their interests were the same, the priorities were the same, we were able to go back to the head of the US sales and say, what you have is a high degree of commonality of interests and priorities in a very different array of goals that are making it difficult for people to grow because they're competing against each other. Back to the executive pay, how's a salesperson get paid? And so what we helped them do was to realign what their critical success factors were and transfer that into specific goals that were reflecting those interests and shared priorities rather than competing against each other. So I think, part of what this is getting to, and it's an old phrase, I certainly didn't coin it, but I use it a lot. The implications of calling wider to help you call higher is really taking much more of a higher helicopter view. When I look across the organization, I'm in a unique position to look at linkages, to look at things that in your day-to-day world at each of those functional levels you might not be thinking about. But as the salesperson who can take a step back and a higher helicopter view, I might be able to tell you some things about your business that you don't talk to each other about, and that I can share information in the network. I can be looking for ways that we can help. It may not be anything to do with what I came into in the first place, but now that I've learned more wide, I might be able to go back high and say, in my working with different folks in your organization, here's what I'm learning. Would you like to talk about how what we might be able to help there, although that may not have been what we were originally called in to do? And then being able to make compelling statements that describe how you can achieve the goals, help them achieve their goals in CSFs. Now you're moving away from pitching products to really, how do I help provide services and products that allow people to meet their business goals? Michael asked for a couple examples of CSFs. I would say probably a lot of us on the call have gone through that whole period of a critical success factor was moving from a product sale to more of a solution approach. Well, that's not a specific goal, but that certainly is an important transition we need to make to help us not only succeed as salespeople, but to call more effectively at a higher level. At some point, you got to go talk to somebody. And so what we put in the center here is the idea of not a product pitch, not a ability, not an opportunity to showcase our stuff, but it really is pulling all the preparation we've done and putting it into the focus of what we would call a strategic business call. So Michael's going to take us from here.
Right. So you're at a point where you have a clarity around what the executives expect from that interaction. You know their critical success factors, and you've leveraged your connections to help that executive understand what's going on in their own organization. You have to pull that all together into a strategic business call. Of course, what we talk about is a strategic business call is a non-product oriented business call on strategic level issues. It's not something that is about your product, your sales process, anything to do with features and benefits of what you're offering. It's really about how your product helps them achieve strategic level interest, or maybe it's just about their strategic critical success factors and your product doesn't come at all, but it's focused on the strategic level interest of that customer, and not trying to position your company and your products, but to help that executive make actions and decisions relative to their own strategy within the organization. Of course, the first step of that is you have to gain access to that executive. And Tom's already shared with you some of the things about they respond to internal referrals better than external. Cold calls, probably not at all in terms of strategic calls. But there are a couple other things I think we found was important. One is that we found that some kind of clever technique for getting to an executive really never works effectively. That really the executive's involvement is a result of their personal interests, their strategic interests in growing their business. And so if they feel that you're going to help satisfy that expectation, they'll see you. In fact, we often talk about the ideas that it's important to keep in mind, executives will never meet for your reasons. They will only meet with you for their reasons. And if they don't feel like their reason is going to be met, they have no interest in meeting with you. And so being able to position, with your contacts, your desire to talk with executives, focusing in on, well, what could their reason be for meeting with me? How do I satisfy that reason? Two, executive teams are usually coached on how to make decisions as to when to involve an executive in a sales process. They know when the executive likes to be involved, whether it's at the beginning, near the end, around a certain size or strategic importance of a meeting. So, gauging, you're talking to your contacts, talking to the members of the executive team that you have contact with, and understanding better will help you position yourselves to meet with them. And so, and the trusted managers are your best access to executives. If you're in contact with somebody who has a lot of influence on an executive, you're more likely to get that executive call. And in other words, executives won't see a sales rep unless a trusted colleague suggests they would, for the most part. So those are some of the key things we found about gaining access. Clever techniques don't work. It's really about understanding their expectations and having somebody trusted help you leverage your knowledge of their expectations to that meeting. The next area is preparation. And we found it's critical to really be prepared well for an executive call. If you try to go to an executive call cold, you're not going to have the success you want. And there are three areas of preparation. One is about the customer. What are they trying to accomplish? What are their critical success factors? What are their industry critical success factors? You also need to prepare to talk about your own company. Again, not in terms of your products and services, but your industry critical success factor, your company's critical success factors, and your capabilities, not your products, but what are you capable of doing to support that client organization achieve their critical success factors, and to come in prepared to talk about the relationship that already exists. How much of what you are selling are they using? What is the ongoing process like? Have there been quality problems, or are things working really well? are deliverables going well? Are services going well? Are they feeling like they're getting value out of what they have? The final area
Hey,
of preparation.
Michael,
Yeah,
may I?
sure.
Before you move on, I see an interesting question that's come up, asking, what's a good value proposition message to help you gain access to an executive? Um, Thoughts on that? I can share after you, or
Why don't you go ahead, Tom? Give me a minute to
yeah.
think about it.
Without getting into specific language, what I'll talk about what really turns me off as an executive, and then try to turn that into what I would factor into a value proposition message. And now I get a lot of, as I'm sure we all do, emails, cold, all those things that are assaulting me with trying to get access to me. And the number one turnoff that I have is you don't know me, you don't know my organization. In fact, given your message, you have no idea what we do. And yet somehow in your message, you're compelled to tell me that you have something to offer me that will absolutely be of interest to me. And it's sort of like, what are you talking about? You don't know me, and you have the audacity to tell me that I can't live without you. And so I tend to try to put that in reverse and say, if you were to say to me something along the lines of, in working with your organization, here's some things that I've learned. Or if I haven't worked with the organization, in working with organizations like yours who face these similar issues, here are the challenges and issues that they've faced. And here are some ways that my organization has um, been able to help them with that. If that has an interest to you, I'd love to talk. Now, again, I'm wordsmithing on the spot, but what I'm trying to demonstrate is I'll talk about what I believe their CSFs are, their interests, talk about our credibility against those, either with their organization or others, and really ask if they'd be interested to have a dialogue about that rather than following with, if that's the case, man, have I got a product for you? Man, have I got a service for you? Um, that's how I would tend to approach that.
Great example. I know so many emails start with, I can help you, achieve your goals, and you're going, well, you don't even know what my goals are, so how can you know you can
Right.
help me achieve them? And I think a lot of it has to do with if this, if you're in a position where you need to talk with an executive and it's a cold call, you don't have any connects with them in the organization. Again, that's not the best strategy, I think. But if that's a requirement you have at that moment, the more you can learn about the industry's critical success factors and communicate your knowledge about that to the executive, saying, we understand that you know companies in your industry are faced with XYZ problem, and we have a solution that we think could improve upon that. If you're interested, I'd happy to talk with you. Yeah, but that's again not the best way. The best way is using other contacts you have, um, lower level managers, mid managers, and gaining an understanding of what makes the what does that executive talk about most within the organization? What are the strategic issues they're most focused on, or the tactical issues they're most focused on? What are the critical success factors they're most focused on? And then using your access message around those critical success factors. It really all boils down to how well do you know that organization's or that industry's critical success factors, and how can you link your service and your capability as an organization to those critical success factors. So great question. And I think a question that came in earlier was around, how do you know they're talking about a critical success factors? What are some key words they use? And a lot of it has to do with how closely tied they are to the goals that the organization has, in terms of if they have a goal to achieve a certain operating profit margin, there are certain things, critical success factors, getting in the way of achieving that goal. And so it's a matter of saying, well, in order to achieve that level of operating profit, what are the things that are getting in your way? What are the factors critical to you achieving that? And that's when the answer to that is a good indication that that's a critical success factor. But again, keep the questions coming in. Love talking with them. Makes a really much more interesting conversation between all of us here. But want to go on and talk a little bit about once you've prepared, once you've gained access, once you've prepared for the call, you have to actually have to conduct the call. And the call itself has a cadence to it. There's a process, a flow to how it occurs. And I often use a term that my dad always told me about playing golf is you have to play quick, but not rushed. Executive doesn't want to spend any more time than he has to with this. Executives are very, very busy. But they want to be able to control and lead the pace of that. So they might want to pause on some areas, go through other areas very quickly. And so you need to have a flow, play quickly through the meeting, but not rush through the meeting so they have an opportunity to lead the pace of that organization. What we found is what's critical is there is an opening, and the opening is really about establishing your credibility, your ability to solve their problems. You have to demonstrate your value to the executives. You need to communicate the clear intent, why you're meeting with them. And if you're meeting with them to talk to them about a product, you need to rethink that one. Second is you need to begin the conducting of the meeting by sharing information. Get the information flowing by first sharing what you know. This could be things about their industry level critical success factors and ask for their comments on them, or their own goals and critical success factors within their organization that you've uncovered in your other conversations. And then really on the goals. What's critical to achieve. Yes, Tom. Do you have
Sorry.
something to add?
Apparently I do. I thought you were done. Sorry. I was just reading the comment from John as you were talking about conducting the meeting. What results are executives promising to shareholders and what's holding them back? That's another great way. First of all, sharing first doesn't mean I'm glad we got a chance to meet today. Boy, have I got a product that I want you to see. It's sharing back to the business level discussion. But part of that business level discussion could be, so I understand that one of the results that you have as your goals, as your CSF with the shareholders is A, B, and C. It would be helpful to understand what is it about that that's getting in your way, or what's happening that's getting in the way of that, or what's preventing you. To John's point about if it's important, if it's critical, if that's what you're getting paid for, if it's not happening, what's up with that? Because you're still not in a product discussion yet. You're in the let's have a business dialogue about what's occurring to you that's important and isn't happening the way you want it. At some point down the road, I can always come back and say, based on what you told me, here's how I think we can help.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Good, John. Thanks.
Yeah, good. Excellent point. Excellent point. So as you're conducting the call, probing their goals and critical success factors, you then will move to closing the conversation. And this is really about gaining agreement on key points you've discussed, making sure that when you both leave that meeting, you have a shared understanding of what's going on and what the critical issues are. This can involve summarizing the goals and critical success factors, maybe asking about their priorities. How do they rank these particular goals or critical success factors? And then sharing your initial thoughts on how this conversation, how the work your two organizations are doing together, help them solve their most critical priorities within their organization. And this closing is, people often skip this part, but this is key because it leaves them with clarity in their own mind about the value you're delivering to their organization, either you personally or your organization. And then finally, it's important to make sure that there's clarity around next steps. What's going forward? And this, may not be another meeting with that executive, but it could be a variety of things. It could be about, is this part of advancing the sales process? This was a key milestone you had to get through and saying, well, we're good to go on moving forward. It could be about leveraging a reference to another executive. Maybe there's somebody in marketing or in finance that you've wanted to talk to and that you can leverage your interaction with this executive to this other executive within the organization. And maybe it's making a maybe you've made some commitments to coming back and discussing of additional findings, or sending them some information, or sharing with something with them. What's critical is that you are following through with this conversation and not leaving it open-ended, or just ending it, but it's really having closure around where you're going and how this served his organization or her organization, and how it's serving your organization in the interaction.
Great. I'm going to go back here for just a second. Looking at the closing, share initial thoughts on how you can help. I'll speak as a receiver of these kinds of meetings rather than speaking to an executive, having salespeople speak to me. A couple of things. I don't want you to leave me hanging at the end like, all right, we just had an hour, and you don't say anything like, well, thanks for sharing, and off you go. On the other hand, I don't want you to try to get me to sign on the dotted line and say, okay, thanks for sharing. I really learned a lot. How many do you want by when? And so to me, it's really important that what sharing initial thoughts on how you can help is, to me, a demonstration that you were present, that you listened to me, that you're taking into account what I've been talking about, not just what you're trying to sell me. And so I think it's really important that you have that close be something that indicates that you've been processing what I've been saying to you, and that there's more to come, rather than either leaving me hanging or trying to close me on the spot. It's just a thought on that one. So going forward, I already said this. I'm a huge believer that you have to be flexible and you have to wing it when you need to, but I'm also a big believer on the old phrase about the calm duck on top of the water because they're paddling furiously underneath, that there's a one-to-one relationship between good prep and the ability to meet others' expectations. You can't leave that to chance. I can't emphasize enough researching and considering CSFs. I think John earlier talked about the compensation in a publicly held company. It's much easier to find critical success factors and strategic initiatives in a publicly held company, but what if they're private? That's where one of your allies can be either your industry knowledge, CSFs of a publicly held company in that industry, maybe not that specific customer, or other customers that you have. But the sharing that you need to come with is that you're prepared to talk at the business level with the executive. You're not coming to have the executive educate you on their business and their industry. That's a cue for a fast exit, by the way. Conducting the strategic business call, looking for links, using the networks. You're there as a connector, if you will. Making linkages to value to the client. I'm back to what I've said a couple of times. I need you to make sure you're clarifying with your customer the value that you provide, not just the products, the features, the benefits, the services, and so forth. Being seen as a resource by the customer organization by creating business level value. I'll go right back to the whole idea of you go through all this work, you work hard to establish credibility with an executive. The last thing that you want is this to be a transactional piece of business that you got to then go back and earn again and earn again. If you could establish more of a business level connection, organization to organization, then you're establishing more probability of having, as we would call, switching costs down the road, because you're seen as creating business value, not just providing good products and good service. We'll stop and ask for questions. We're getting very close to the top of the hour, but here's a link to an article that one of our colleagues has written on the executive calling and information on Wilson Learning. And I would stop at this point and say, if there's any questions, perfect. If not, I'll turn it over to David.
Well, thanks, Tom and Michael. Yeah, actually, you've done a really good job of answering questions so far, so I haven't seen any new ones. So there are some people typing, probably to say thank you, but we'll see if they have any final questions. As we do that, I'll move the chat down to the bottom and bring up a poll on the right-hand side. Maybe you can tell us in the right-hand side poll, what's the best or most useful idea you're coming away with today? Maybe give us a little insight into what you learned here today. That would be great. We'll see. No, mostly just thank yous coming through. I did put that link into chat for folks, so you can just click that to get to that article. And I just want to thank you both again for just such an insightful presentation. I think people are getting a lot out of it. Answer CFS at different levels of the organization and industry. Yeah, so people are walking away with some really good applicable ideas today, I think.
You can't go in with a rote script. You got to have it be geared specifically to them, correct?
Exactly. Well, that kind of brings us up to the top of the hour. So I think, gentlemen, oh, sorry, I'm late, but I hear some good planning ideas. Well, Tom and Michael, I want to thank you again, and thank Wilson Learning. Do check out wilsonlearning.com. The link's right over there on the slide at the bottom left. We want to thank you for providing us again with such great content, and we look forward to having you both back in the future.
Great.
Great.
Thanks for hosting as always.
Yeah, thank you, David. Great.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.